It looked like just another frozen box at a lonely bus stop, tucked into the corner, covered in frost. But when bus driver Edgar Hall opened it, he found 5 golden retriever puppies, barely a month old, trembling, weak, their tiny bodies curled around each other for warmth. Beneath a layer of rags, he discovered something far worse, a note smeared in blood with 5 haunting words. Please help them. They did nothing wrong. Edgar thought he'd seen everything in his 20 years behind the wheel, but nothing could have prepared him for what that note would uncover. A secret buried in snow, a cry written in blood, and one boy brave enough to risk everything to save them. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard, hit subscribe, because this story will break your heart, and then remind you why we still hope. It was just past 6 in the morning when the wind began to scream through the avenues of Minneapolis like a choir of broken glass. The blizzard that had settled over the city since midnight had grown meaner by the hour, covering stop signs and doorways, silencing footsteps, and driving most people back into their beds. But not Edgar Hall. His bus had rolled out of the depot at 5:15 sharp, tires grumbling, wipers swiping endlessly across a windshield that never truly cleared. The city had not officially shut down service, yet, but only the bravest or the loneliest would ride today. Edgar Hall was both. At 49, Edgar had the look of a man who had aged faster than his years would admit. He was tall but slightly stooped, with pale skin that the sun had long since forgotten, and hands thickened from decades of blue-collar labor. His face was weathered, with deep-set lines carved into his brow and under his eyes, and his hair, once reddish blonde, had turned almost entirely silver, though he wore it cropped short beneath a navy transit cap. His uniform was neat, though worn at the cuffs, and his boots were scuffed in the places that spoke of long walks to places no one else would go. Edgar had worked nearly every job a man could take without a college degree. He had laid asphalt in the heat, salted roads in the dead of winter, scrubbed the floors of a meatpacking plant until the chemicals cracked his hands open. But the job he'd held longest, and the one that now defined him, was behind the wheel of a city bus. The route didn't change, but the people did. Some were silent, some were angry, some were grateful. Edgar treated them all the same, with a quiet nod and a steady hand. His kindness wasn't loud, and it wasn't showy. It came in the form of holding the bus a few extra seconds for a limping old man, or offering his own gloves to a teenage boy in a hoodie too thin for January. It came from a place deeper than duty, because Edgar Hall knew what it was to be invisible, to be passed over, to be reduced to just another man. His wife had left him when he was 32, taking their daughter with her to California. There had been promises of shared custody, of phone calls and summer visits, but those faded fast. When his daughter, Lily, was 15, she was diagnosed with a rare immune disorder. Edgar flew out to see her just once, his first time on a plane. She died 3 years later. He had saved every drawing she sent him, every card, every scrap of a life shared too briefly and from too far away. Since then, Edgar had lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on 42nd Street. No pets, no plants, no visitors. But every morning, he woke up before dawn, ironed his shirt, and showed up on time. Because that's what you do, he told himself. That's what decent men do. The bus rumbled down the nearly empty avenue, tires crunching over ice, heater humming loudly in the silence. Only 2 passengers had boarded so far, an older woman headed to a dialysis appointment, and a high school janitor bundled in 3 coats. Both sat quietly, eyes glassy from lack of sleep. Edgar glanced at them in the mirror, then back at the road. Visibility was poor, and he was due to make a stop near Northfield and 7th. As he pulled closer, he slowed to a crawl. The stop sat half buried under a snowdrift, the plexiglass shelter frosted over. Nobody waited, but something caught his eye. A large cardboard box sat just outside the shelter, nestled against the bench. It wasn't there yesterday. Its top flaps fluttered slightly, as if something inside it was breathing. Edgar parked the bus and turned on the hazards. "Give me a second," he called gently to the back, though no one responded. He grabbed his coat, stepped outside, and immediately winced as the wind cut through him. His breath fogged instantly. The cold was aggressive, penetrating even the thickest layers. He trudged across the icy sidewalk and crouched beside the box. Up close, it looked even worse. One side had been dented, the bottom soaked with slush, and small scratch marks lined the damp cardboard. A faint sound, so soft he almost missed it, came from within. It wasn't a meow, it wasn't a squeak. It was something in between, a fragile, pitiful whimper. Slowly, Edgar lifted the top flap. The breath left his body like he'd been punched. Inside, 5 tiny puppies. Golden retrievers by the looks of them, huddled together in a trembling mass. Their cream-colored fur was matted with grime and small clumps of snow. Their bellies were sunken. One had a small cut across its paw, and another had eyes crusted nearly shut. They looked to be no more than a month old, and they were freezing. But that wasn't what made Edgar freeze. Tucked just beside them, partially buried under a stained hand towel, was a torn piece of notebook paper. Its edges were curled, and a thick red smear stretched across one side. The writing, barely legible, read, "Please help them. They did nothing wrong." It wasn't just the words, it was the way they were written, jagged, uneven, frantic, and the unmistakable dark stain that had soaked into the lower half of the page. Blood. Edgar stood still as the snow fell harder around him, dusting the box like a grave. The wind howled through the street, but in that moment all he could hear was Lily's voice, echoing faintly from a memory long buried. She had once said something eerily similar when rescuing a stray kitten. "She didn't ask to be hurt, Daddy. She didn't do anything wrong." His fingers tightened around the edge of the box, not in anger, but in stunned disbelief. Not just at the cruelty of it, but at the silent courage it must have taken for someone, anyone, to leave this behind. The puppies stirred slightly, eyes flickering open. One of them tried to lift its head and failed. Edgar exhaled slowly, a breath made of sorrow and something else. Resolve. He gently closed the flap again and cradled the box in his arms. It was going to be a long day. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Outside the windows of the bus, Minneapolis was a ghost town, painted in white and choked by silence. The early morning sky remained dark, as if the sun itself had hesitated to rise. The heater inside the bus wheezed on full blast, trying its best to hold back the cold that crept through every corner. Edgar Hall kept glancing over his shoulder at the box resting behind his seat. The 5 puppies barely moved. One twitched, another gave a low, rasping whimper. Their breaths fogged the inside of the box, their tiny bodies curled into each other in desperation. The next stop, 8th and Glendale, was usually quiet, but today it felt almost abandoned. As Edgar slowed the bus to a gentle stop, he saw a familiar figure stepping toward the curb, tall, wrapped in a gray coat, blonde hair tied back, and a tired but alert expression beneath a worn knit cap. It was Marissa Cole. She stepped onto the bus and nodded once at Edgar, brushing snow off her coat. "Morning," she said simply. Edgar nodded in return. "Rough one." Marissa Cole had been a regular on his route for nearly a year. She was 28, tall, with long limbs and sharp features softened by a natural calmness in her face. She was fair-skinned, with a light dusting of freckles across her nose and a narrow scar on her right hand, a relic from her days in culinary school before she had changed paths. She worked the night shift at St. Luke's Community Hospital, and Edgar knew she got off around 6:30 every morning. They'd exchanged casual pleasantries before, but nothing more. She wasn't chatty. She was observant. As she moved to take her usual seat, her eyes caught the cardboard box behind Edgar's seat. She paused, frowned, and stepped forward. "What's that?" Edgar glanced at the box. "Found it at Northfield and 7th. Somebody left them there." Marissa crouched beside the box and slowly peeled back the top flap. Her breath caught. "Oh no." She reached in gently, touching the nearest puppy's head. "They're freezing." Edgar reached into his coat and pulled out the blood-stained note, wrapped in a napkin. He handed it to her. "This was with them." Marissa unfolded the napkin and read the words. "Please help them. They did nothing wrong." The silence between them deepened. She folded the note again and handed it back. "How long ago do you think they were left?" Edgar shrugged. "Could have been hours. I almost didn't see the box. Just looked like trash in the snow." Marissa stood and opened her tote bag. Inside were medical supplies, a few thermal packets, bandages, a roll of gauze, and a half-empty bottle of electrolyte solution. "I can warm them a little. They're in early hypothermia. One of them's got a bleeding paw. She didn't ask Edgar for permission. She just got to work. Kneeling on the bus floor, she began checking each puppy, wrapping one in a scarf, rubbing another gently to stimulate blood flow, soaking a corner of gauze in warm water to let the smallest pup lick it. Edgar watched quietly. There was something efficient and focused about the way she moved. She wasn't flustered by the cold or the smell or the mess. She just did what needed to be done. Edgar turned his attention back to the road and slowly pulled the bus forward. The route would continue, even if no one else boarded today. They drove through the ghosted city, stopping at intersections no one stood at. The bus was a ship moving through snow and silence. The heater hummed, the puppies whimpered, and Marissa worked in rhythm with the storm. As she worked, she spoke, not in a flood, but with the measured clarity of someone who had learned to talk while keeping her hands moving. "I used to be in pediatrics," she said, "but a few years back, I made a mistake. Missed a dosage during a shift change. The kid lived, but it changed everything." She didn't look up. "Since then, I've stuck to emergency intake, shorter interactions, less risk." Edgar nodded. He understood regret without needing the details. She looked at the smallest pup. "I've always had a soft spot for the ones no one notices. These guys didn't deserve this," Edgar replied after a moment. "Most of us don't." When the shift ended just before 8 a.m., Edgar pulled into the depot. Outside, the wind still howled, and snow piled against the curb like white barricades. Marissa zipped up her coat and stood, arms folded. "I live a few blocks from here," Edgar said. "It's warm, clean. We could keep them there, until someone figures out what to do next." Marissa hesitated, then nodded. "I'll help you carry them." There was no bonding moment, no lingering glances, just two people who didn't look away when something small and helpless needed them. As they stepped off the bus, the wind slammed into them, but they didn't flinch. In the box, 5 puppies lay nestled together, no longer alone. And for now, that was enough. The morning dragged on slowly, thick with the scent of wet fur, faint antiseptic, and steaming instant coffee. Edgar's apartment, located above McCready's Hardware on 42nd Street, had the quiet melancholy of a place where little had changed in years. It was clean, sparsely decorated, and dimly lit. A single worn recliner faced a muted television. A tiny kitchen sat untouched except for the kettle on the stove, and picture frames lined the shelves, most of them holding fading photographs of a young girl with wild auburn hair and an irrepressible grin. The 5 puppies had been dried, fed a little broth, and wrapped in Edgar's old flannel shirts. They now slept together on a folded blanket by the heater, their breathing steady, small bellies rising and falling in rhythm. Edgar watched them with arms crossed, standing in the hallway like a man staring through time. Marissa sat cross-legged nearby, rechecking one puppy's paw pad for infection. "I called the shelter," she said without looking up. "The downtown center's open after 10. They've got heated space and emergency care staff on rotation. I spoke with someone named Melissa." Edgar nodded. "We'll take them. But first," Marissa continued, reaching for her bag, "I want to look at that note again." Edgar pulled the crumpled napkin-wrapped page from his coat pocket and handed it over. Marissa unfolded it carefully, laying it flat on the coffee table. The writing, barely legible, curved up at odd angles. The words were shaky, misspelled slightly, and the ink had bled at the corners, giving way to a darker crimson smear beneath. "Please help them. They did nothing wrong." Marissa squinted. "This wasn't written by an adult." "What makes you say that?" She pointed to the P in please, written backward. "Kids do this, especially around 8 to 12 years old. The spacing, too. Uneven and unsure." She looked again. "And this?" She lifted the paper, revealing the faintest trace of a ripped-off tab, sticky to the touch. This was taped to something. "See the residue? School tape. Clear, matte. Like the kind teachers use. Or kids," she said, voice tightening. "Which means this note was prepared, not scribbled last second." Edgar rubbed his jaw. "You think a kid left them?" Marissa nodded slowly. "I think a kid saved them." They drove the puppies to the shelter just after 10. The snow had begun to let up, though gray clouds still hung like bruises above the skyline. The front desk of the Minneapolis Animal Crisis Center was manned by a young volunteer with a name tag that read Kelsey, her cheeks still red from the cold. She led them to an intake room where a heating mat was already humming softly beneath a wool blanket. "Melissa's out on pickup," Kelsey explained, gently settling one of the puppies into a crate. "But we've got space for them. We'll keep them together." Marissa filled out the incident report, giving the location and time they found the box, noting the injuries. Edgar hovered in the corner, silent, his eyes locked on the small bundle of golden fur now nestled under the heating lamp. Kelsey returned with a clipboard. "There's someone who helps us with harder cases," she said. "Logan's his name, former military, works part-time here, and runs local investigations for cruelty reports. He usually stops by in the mornings." A few minutes later, the door opened, and a man stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. Logan Pierce, in his late 30s, stood tall with a lean, squared frame. He wore a canvas jacket dusted in road salt, and his face was clean-shaven, pale, with sharp cheekbones, and a military cut of dark blonde hair. His eyes were light blue, watchful, precise. "You're the bus driver?" he asked Edgar directly. Edgar nodded. "Found them at a stop near Northfield and 7th, just past 6. Logan turned to Marissa. "And you helped bring them in?" She nodded, arms crossed. Kelsey handed Logan the note, now sealed in a clear evidence sleeve. He studied it carefully, then looked at the fold line and the tape residue at the edge. This was prepped, taped to the side of the box, not just dropped in. "That's what we thought," Marissa said. "The writing. It looks like a child's." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Could be. We've had similar notes before, but none this clear. If it was a kid, they wanted these dogs to be found. Might be trying to blow the whistle on someone." "Any cameras near the stop?" Edgar asked. "There are 2, Logan replied. "One mounted on the traffic pole and another facing the sidewalk from a nearby laundromat. I'll pull footage." Marissa stepped forward. "If it was a child, he or she may still be in danger. They didn't leave contact information. That says they're scared." Logan's gaze softened slightly. "We'll do what we can. These things take time." He picked up a folder from the counter. "You've both done more than most would." Edgar nodded, then turned toward the door. Just didn't feel right leaving them. As they stepped outside, the wind had eased, the streets still slushy but passable. Edgar glanced down at his boots, then at the empty sky above. The silence felt different now. Not so heavy, not so final. Marissa broke it. "You know, I think that kid who wrote the note, I think they've tried to help before." "What makes you say that?" "Because they knew how to make people notice." Edgar looked over at her. Maybe someone finally did. By mid-afternoon, the snow had turned into a light, slushy drizzle, washing streaks of soot-colored meltwater down the curbs of downtown Minneapolis. The sharp chill from the blizzard had dulled, but the weight in the air remained, the kind that hung around after something important had just begun, though no one could quite name what. Logan Pierce sat in a dim back office at the Minneapolis Animal Crisis Center, the monitor in front of him flickering with black and white footage. His posture was stiff, back straight even while seated, the military discipline still evident in every line of his movements. He had changed into a thick wool sweater and utility pants, and the scar near his left eyebrow, a remnant from a roadside explosion in Mosul, twitched faintly as his eyes scanned frame after frame. He didn't blink much. Logan had a way of going still, the kind that made you forget he was even there. But his mind rarely stopped. Earlier that morning, he had pulled surveillance footage from the city's traffic pole camera near Northfield and 7th. The resolution wasn't great, just blurry outlines and motion trails, but it offered one crucial clue. Around 5:38 a.m., barely 20 minutes before Edgar Hall's bus passed the stop, a small figure emerged from the alley across the street. The boy wore an oversized winter coat, the hood drawn up tightly, obscuring his face. He dragged a large cardboard box behind him, both hands clutching the sides as he shuffled across the snow-covered sidewalk. The box thudded as it hit the bench, and the boy paused, pulling something from his pocket, a piece of paper. He taped it to the inside flap of the box, tucked it between some fabric, then stood frozen for a second, staring at the box like he wanted to say something to it. Then, without looking back, he ran. Not toward any buildings, toward the alley again. And then he was gone. Logan leaned closer. The boy's gait was distinctive, limping slightly on his left foot. He zoomed in on the figure, adjusting contrast and shadows. The coat looked too big for him, Military style, faded green, with a patch missing on the left sleeve, a torn hem dragged behind. Not the kind of coat a child picks, more like something handed down, or stolen. At that moment, the door creaked open behind him. Kelsey, the volunteer from earlier, poked her head in. "Sorry, there's someone asking for you. Older man, said you'd want to see this." Logan stood, stretching his arms once before following her through the corridor. In the front intake lobby, Edgar Hall stood with a folded newspaper under one arm and a grocery bag in the other. He looked tired but focused. "Got something you'll want to see," Edgar said, handing over the newspaper. "This ran last week. Local corner piece. Here." Logan unfolded it. The headline read, "Crates of dogs found in abandoned lot near rail yard. No arrests made." The article detailed how animal control had been tipped off about barking herd in an old shipping yard in northeast Minneapolis. They had found several crates empty by the time they arrived, but filled with leftover chains, straw bedding, and chewed-up collars. No surveillance, no witnesses, no names. A dead end. Edgar pointed to the photo in the corner, a blurry shot of the crates. "That's less than 10 blocks from the bus stop where we found the puppies." Logan frowned. "You think there's a connection?" Edgar nodded. "I don't believe in coincidences, especially not ones that happen in this kind of cold." Logan exhaled through his nose. "I was going to check the industrial zones tomorrow. Looks like I'll need to start earlier." The next morning, Logan drove his pickup through the eastern warehouse district, where corrugated steel buildings leaned like aging giants. The snow here had turned to sludge, stained with oil and soot, and the air carried that bitter metallic tang of rust and rot. He stopped near a fenced-off lot at the end of Camden Street, just off the railroad tracks. The sign read, "Private property, no trespassing." He cut the engine and stepped out, boots crunching through gravel and ice. The place had the feel of something used but not cared for. Near the back, behind a row of rusted-out dumpsters, he found it. A small fire barrel, cold now, but surrounded by ash and scattered paper scraps. Among them, he spotted something strange, a torn strip of blue cotton cloth. It looked like the corner of a child's backpack. Cartoon stitching barely visible, frayed as if it had been yanked off in haste. He pocketed it and walked further. Behind one of the crates, tucked half under a broken pallet, was another cardboard box, smaller than the one at the bus stop. Empty now. But inside, against the wall, etched faintly into the damp cardboard with what looked like the edge of a nail, were words. "Don't hurt them again." Logan stood still for a long time. He didn't photograph it right away. He just looked. This wasn't a one-time act. The boy who left that note at the station wasn't just reacting. He had been watching, enduring, trying. Someone had been hurting dogs here. Maybe raising them to sell, maybe worse. And this child, whoever he was, had tried silently to stop it. Back at the shelter that evening, Marissa was finishing a health check on the smallest puppy. The little thing was doing better, eating solid food now, and beginning to walk shakily. Marissa smiled faintly as it nuzzled into her hand, tail wagging just once. Logan entered the room, his boots leaving wet prints across the floor. He held up the blue cloth. "I think we're looking for a boy, between 10 and 13. Limp on his left side, wears an old army coat. Might have been connected to a backyard breeder near Camden Street." Marissa's eyes darkened. "Is he safe?" Logan didn't answer immediately. "I don't know, but he's out there, and he's trying to help." The Minneapolis Animal Crisis Center was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that settled like dust. Fine, nearly invisible, but noticeable if you stood still long enough. The shelter lights had dimmed to overnight mode, casting a soft amber glow through the halls. The HVAC hummed softly overhead, occasionally interrupted by the faint shuffle of paws from the kennel wing. Most of the staff had left for the evening. Only Marissa Cole remained on call in the medical bay, catching up on chart entries and refilling water bowls. Marissa had become a familiar face at the shelter over the past week. Though she technically worked full-time at St. Luke's Hospital, she came by after shifts, claiming it helped her decompress. No one questioned it. She moved through the shelter with an easy confidence, her blonde ponytail always neatly tied back, scrubs exchanged for jeans and wool sweaters, her eyes calm but constantly scanning. There was a steadiness to her, like someone who had already lived through chaos and come out the other side a little quieter but sharper. In one of the recovery crates, the 5 golden retriever puppies lay curled together under a heated blanket. Their cream-colored coats were cleaner now, fuller with warmth and care, and their eyes opened more each day. One had started walking, clumsy but determined. Another had learned to bark, soft, high-pitched yelps that seemed to surprise even itself. Marissa watched them from the adjacent break room window, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the occasional thump of a tail against crate walls. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the shelter's exterior motion light flicked on. The hallway camera, mounted near the east exit and facing the back fence, clicked to life. The footage, later reviewed by Logan Pierce, showed the following. A small figure approached the perimeter gate from the alleyway. The child wore a dark hoodie, pulled low, and a familiar army green coat, oversized, tattered at the hem. The figure crouched low, slipped a hand between the bars of the fence, and began slowly prying up one of the bottom panels. It was a trick well known among stray cats and stray kids. The figure slipped through and crept silently across the side yard, avoiding the brighter security lights. He stopped just outside the kennel windows, near the back of the building. There, through the large viewing pane, the puppy crate was clearly visible. The boy, because it was almost certainly a boy, judging by the build and posture, knelt slowly. He rested both hands on the windowsill and leaned forward, nose nearly touching the glass. He didn't move for a long time. The tape showed nearly 6 uninterrupted minutes of stillness, broken only by a brief flinch when one of the puppies sat up and looked toward the glass. The boy leaned back slightly, as if not wanting to startle it. Then he stood, looked once over his shoulder toward the alley, and ran. Marissa didn't notice any of this until morning. The shelter's night manager, Mrs. Adrian Keller, found the fence slightly ajar during a perimeter check at 6:45 a.m. Adrian, short, square-shouldered, and fiercely meticulous despite her 62 years, reviewed the footage and immediately called Logan. Logan arrived within the hour, snow still clinging to the hood of his canvas jacket. He reviewed the camera logs, leaning against the desk with arms folded, eyes narrowing as the footage replayed. "Same coat," he muttered. "Same limp on the left foot. This was him." Marissa joined him, holding a clipboard. "He didn't try to take anything. Didn't leave anything either. He just wanted to see them," Logan said. Edgar Hall arrived later that morning, a grocery bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. He had developed a quiet habit of visiting the puppies each morning before his route. He never said much, but he always brought something. Fresh towels, broth, soft dog treats, a chew toy or two. He entered the room where the puppies rested and sat cross-legged on the floor, allowing them to crawl into his lap. When Marissa told him about the boy's late-night visit, Edgar didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the window, then at the puppies, then back again. His eyes stayed there. "He came just to look at them?" he asked eventually. Marissa nodded. "Didn't try to come inside, just watched, then left." Edgar's voice was low. "That's not something you do unless you care." He stood, slower than usual, and walked over to the window. Outside, snowflakes were beginning to fall again. Soft, scattered, like the sky had changed its mind. Edgar stared out, expression unreadable, but his jaw tightened the way it always did when he was thinking too hard about something personal. "I used to see Lily do that," he said after a moment. "When she was small, we'd pass the shelter on the way to school. She'd stop at the window, just to look. Said the dogs looked lonely." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Back in the surveillance room, Logan printed stills from the footage, blurred images of the boy's profile, the coat, the limp. He marked the time and weather conditions. Then he pinned one of the images on the backboard beside the growing map of abandoned properties, alley reports, and tip calls. A red thread connected the shelter to the bus stop. Another thread ran from the bus stop to the shipping yard. The city was starting to speak, but it was Edgar who stayed longest at the window that morning, watching the sky, the street, the empty sidewalk where a boy had once knelt quietly, trying to see if his act of kindness had meant anything. It had. The sun was just beginning to rise when Marissa Cole arrived at the shelter, breath puffing in clouds as she locked her car and crossed the icy sidewalk. The snow from the night before had stopped, leaving the city frozen and still, the streets quiet beneath a pale orange glow. She stepped onto the narrow walkway that ran along the side of the building, normally just a shortcut from the staff lot. But this morning, something halted her stride. There, faint and already half smudged by frost, were chalk marks. She knelt to look closer. Written in shaky, uneven print across the concrete slab in front of the shelter's side door were 6 simple words. Are they okay? N. The letters had been scrawled in pale green chalk, the kind used in schoolyards or on broken sidewalks during warmer months. The N trailed off like the writer had been rushed, or scared. The chalk was dusted with frost, but not snow, which meant it had been written sometime after the snowfall ended, likely just before sunrise. Marissa stood slowly, heart tightening. This was the boy, the same one who had slipped through the fence days earlier, who had watched silently through the glass. He hadn't tried to speak then, but now he had. And he had left a name, or at least a letter. Back inside, Marissa called Logan. He arrived within 20 minutes, his coat still unzipped and the breath in his voice raw from the cold. "Show me," he said, eyes narrowed as he crouched beside the chalk message. He didn't speak for a long time, simply pulled out his phone and snapped several photos before kneeling down to study the lettering. "Kid's handwriting," he muttered, "too short to be an adult. See the curves, the way the A is open? This was done quickly." He stood and looked around. He came back again, and he's getting bolder. "Or more desperate," Marissa said softly. That afternoon, Logan visited the East River Camp, an unofficial settlement nestled between a concrete drainage culvert and a row of defunct warehouses by the Mississippi. It wasn't marked on city maps, but locals knew it. Over the years, it had grown from a temporary tent site into a makeshift village, with plywood lean-tos, plastic tarps for roofs, and smoke curling from repurposed barrels. Children could sometimes be seen darting between structures like ghosts, wary and fast. Logan moved slowly, nodding to those he passed, avoiding sudden gestures. He approached a table near the camp entrance where an older woman sat beside a pushcart filled with bread, apples, and mismatched scarves. She was small and thin, wrapped in a heavy blue parka with fur-lined sleeves. Her skin was leathery from sun and cold, and her white hair was tied back in a braid that fell to her waist. Her name, painted in flaking letters on a hanging sign, was Mildred. "Looking for someone?" she asked, voice raspy but kind. Logan stopped beside her. "Maybe a boy, 10 to 13, wears an army coat, limp on his left foot, might have come through here recently." Mildred squinted up at him, then looked away. "We don't track names down here." "I understand," Logan replied. "I'm not with the police, just trying to help him." She tapped a gloved finger against her knee. "Saw a boy like that 2, maybe 3 nights ago. Came by quiet, didn't talk much, took a slice of bread, gave it to a stray dog before eating any himself. Face was scratched up. Had that look." "What look?" "The kind kids get when they've been running too long. Not from danger exactly, from disappointment." Logan remained still. "Did he say his name?" She hesitated. "Not to me, but another kid shouted after him, called him Noah." That was enough. Back at the shelter, Logan relayed the information to Marissa and Edgar. They stood in the staff kitchen, the buzz of the heater the only sound between them. "Noah," Edgar repeated. "He left them, and he's still watching." "He's coming back to check," Marissa added, "to make sure they're okay. That means he hasn't left the city. He's close." Logan opened a small notebook and scribbled the name, underlining it once. "And he's leaving a trail. Quiet, but it's there. If he keeps coming back..." Edgar spoke next, voice low but certain. "Then we'll be ready." That night, Edgar placed a small tin of dog treats near the shelter side door. Marissa wrote a note on bright yellow paper. "They're safe. You helped them. Please be safe too. They left it taped to the same spot where the chalk had been. Beneath it, they set a new stick of sidewalk chalk in a Ziploc bag. And then, they waited. The wind that night wasn't as sharp as it had been in previous days, but the cold had settled into everything. Metal, glass, even the bones of the city. Snow clung to gutters and the crevices of alleyways like breath that had frozen mid-sigh. Inside the shelter, Edgar stood quietly at the side door, arms folded, watching the note Marissa had taped earlier sway slightly in the breeze. The bag of sidewalk chalk rested just below it, untouched. He checked again at midnight. Still there. At 3:12 a.m., a quiet chime alerted Logan in the back surveillance room. A motion sensor had been tripped. He leaned forward as the grainy black and white feed came to life. A small figure moved along the edge of the frame, cautious, slow, same coat, same limp. The boy approached the door, crouched, and reached toward the note. He didn't remove it, just read it, carefully, then looked at the chalk. He took it. The next morning, written beside the door in uneven, faint strokes, was a new message. They deserve better. I didn't know where else to go. Noah. It was the first time he'd left a name, a full one, and it was all Logan needed. By noon, Logan was back at the East River camp, asking questions, showing a printed still of the surveillance footage. Most shook their heads or turned away, but eventually, a lanky boy with a patched-up ski jacket and missing front tooth said he'd seen Noah duck into a brickwork storage unit near the edge of the industrial park. Logan found the place within the hour. It was a half-collapsed garage with tarps stretched across the doorframe and pallets stacked like barricades. Inside, the air was rank with oil, mold, and something sourer, wet fur. The space had been divided with plastic sheets and old insulation boards. A rusted heat lamp flickered dimly in the corner. Noah was there. He was sitting cross-legged on a worn mattress beside a black plastic crate filled with old newspapers and chewed-up collars. His coat was the same, military green, 3 sizes too big. His face was pale, scratched near the cheekbone, and his sandy blonde hair stuck to his forehead in damp curls. One of his shoes was untied. The other had no sole. He looked up when Logan entered. He didn't run. Logan approached slowly. "Noah?" The boy nodded once. "I'm not here to hurt you." Noah didn't speak. Logan sat across from him, legs bent. "The dogs you left, 5 golden retriever puppies. They're safe, warm, eating on their own now. One of them wags his tail like he's got somewhere to be." Noah gave a half smile, faint and unsteady. "Good." Logan waited. The silence felt purposeful. Then Noah spoke, voice soft and rough from disuse. "They were born in our garage. We had a lot of dogs. Too many." He glanced toward the back corner of the space where a metal crate sat, empty now. "He sells them. Not always healthy. Doesn't care. If they cry too much, he hits them." Logan didn't interrupt. Noah picked at the edge of his sleeve. "The mom died last month, bleeding. He said it was my fault for letting her loose. I buried her in the backyard." He looked up briefly, eyes glassy but dry. "I knew he'd sell the pups for cash. They were barely walking. I tried to hide them in the old dryer. He found them." Logan's voice was even. "Did he hurt you?" Noah shrugged, which said more than 1,000 words. "I waited until he passed out, took a box, some towels. I didn't have a pen, so I cut my hand on a fence nail by accident. Used it to write." He lifted his left hand, bandaged, but not professionally. "I didn't know where to go. I thought maybe someone would find them. Someone who cared more than he did." Logan exhaled through his nose. They did. They sat in silence for a while longer. Eventually, Logan stood and extended a hand. "Come on, let's get your hand cleaned up. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Noah hesitated but took it. At the shelter, Marissa helped to clean and redress the wound properly. She didn't ask questions, just worked gently, her hands practiced and patient. Edgar brought over a sandwich and a clean sweatshirt from the staff donation bin. Noah didn't speak much that day, but he watched the puppies through the glass for nearly an hour. When one of them barked and pressed its paw to the crate wall, Noah pressed his hand to the same spot. He didn't cry, but something in him loosened. That night, Logan called Child Protective Services, not the hotline, but a personal contact, Laura Jensen, a caseworker he trusted, who had a reputation for working through red tape when needed. Laura arrived the next morning. She was in her mid-40s, thin and sharply dressed in a navy peacoat, with steel gray eyes and tightly tied auburn hair. She introduced herself with no nonsense, but her voice carried a warmth that didn't feel rehearsed. She listened to Noah, all of it, then said, "I can get you into a youth safe house tonight. Warm bed, hot food, and the chance to visit here whenever you want, for as long as the dogs are still around." Noah looked at Edgar, then Marissa, then Logan. "Will they remember me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "They already do," Edgar said. The days that followed moved differently, as though the city itself had paused to exhale. Snow still clung to the gutters and sidewalks, but the storm had passed. A subtle warmth hung in the air, not of temperature, but of relief. At the Minneapolis Animal Crisis Center, the routine continued: feeding schedules, checkups, volunteer rotations. But a shift had occurred behind the scenes, and it revolved around a boy named Noah. Marissa Cole stood at the staff counter early Thursday morning, reviewing vaccination records for the 5 golden retriever puppies. She wore a thick beige sweater layered over scrubs, her hair tied in a low bun, and her eyes a little brighter than usual. Across from her, Edgar Hall quietly restocked the towel shelf, folding each one with a precision that suggested both care and distraction. They worked in a rhythm that needed no words: familiar, focused, steady. In the background, Noah laughed. It was the first time anyone at the shelter had heard him laugh. Sharp, short, and entirely unexpected. He was crouched near the play enclosure, gently nudging a tennis ball toward one of the pups who had just learned to pounce. His oversized coat had been replaced by a donated hoodie and jeans that nearly fit. And though the scratches on his face hadn't fully healed, the tension in his shoulders had eased. For the first time, he didn't look like a child on the run. He looked like a boy who belonged somewhere. Marissa glanced at Edgar. "It's good to see." Edgar nodded. "He's better with them than I ever was with people." The two had made a quiet decision 3 days earlier. After a long conversation with Laura Jensen, the CPS worker who had taken Noah into temporary protective care, Marissa and Edgar had offered to be Noah's emergency guardians while the legal process played out. Neither of them had made that offer lightly. Edgar hadn't shared a home with anyone since his daughter, and Marissa hadn't planned on raising anyone but herself. But something about Noah had cracked something open in both of them. "He needs stability," Laura had said, "and frankly, you two are the first adults he hasn't bolted from." Now, under their care, Noah stayed part-time at Marissa's small basement apartment and part-time at Edgar's. They made it simple: breakfast, schoolwork, a cot with clean sheets, and time every afternoon with the puppies. No speeches, no rules carved in stone. Just consistency. It was more than Noah had ever had. Meanwhile, Logan Pierce was moving forward with the case. He had taken the details Noah had shared: location, dates, descriptions, and passed them directly to the city's Animal Cruelty Task Force. Working with 2 plainclothes detectives, he had coordinated a quiet operation to investigate the illegal dog breeding operation run by Noah's stepfather, Keith Bramer. A man in his late 50s, Keith had a record of petty theft and previous citations for neglect, but nothing that had stuck. Until now. Logan watched from across the street as uniformed officers entered the property. An unkempt single-story house on the city's fringe, surrounded by broken fencing and rusting lawn equipment. In the garage, they found what they needed: 4 cages with illegal heat lamps, foul-smelling bedding, no food or water in sight, and evidence of recent litters. In the basement, they found a ledger: names, prices, and scribbled notations of "too weak" beside 2 entries, crossed out. Logan didn't need to guess what that meant. Keith was arrested on site for animal cruelty, unlicensed breeding, and endangering a minor. News of the operation spread quickly, especially after the shelter released a press statement linking the rescued puppies to the case. Logan had hesitated about going public, but Marissa had said it best: if this story helps even one more kid speak up, it's worth it. Within days, donations began arriving at the shelter. Bags of food, cleaning supplies, toys, blankets, even thank you letters from school children. One note, drawn in crayon, simply read, "Thank you for saving the puppies. I would have cried if they died." It was signed Chloe, age 7. That evening, Noah helped hang the letters on the break room bulletin board. He moved carefully, taping each one with a precision that mirrored Edgar's towel folding. Marissa brought him hot chocolate and sat nearby, watching him. He hadn't said much since the news broke. Not about the arrest, not about the past. Finally, she asked gently, "How do you feel about it all?" Noah shrugged. "I don't know. Like it happened to someone else, but I'm glad the dogs are safe." She nodded. "And what about you?" Noah hesitated. Then, with his eyes still fixed on the paper hearts pinned to the board, he said, "I think I might be safe now, too." That night, he stayed at Edgar's apartment, curled up under a quilt older than he was, in a spare room that had once been storage and now smelled faintly of peanut butter treats and laundry soap. Edgar didn't say much before turning off the light. just stood at the doorway for a long moment and muttered, "You did good, kid." In the darkness, Noah whispered, "Thanks." The next morning, at the shelter, one of the puppies climbed into Noah's lap and refused to move for an hour. Logan snapped a photo quietly, then handed it to Edgar later that day. "Might be worth keeping," he said. Edgar framed it that afternoon. The sun had broken through the Minneapolis sky for the first time in what felt like weeks, casting a golden warmth over Riverfront Commons Park. The snow was long gone, replaced by the soft crunch of budding grass and the laughter of children running between booths. Balloons bobbed lazily in the spring air. Music played over speakers, light acoustic strumming from a local high school band. It was the annual Spring Adoption Fair, hosted by the Minneapolis Animal Crisis Center, and this year's turnout was the biggest in over a decade. Colorful tents lined the park's central path, each marked with a banner and flanked by tables of volunteers. There were cats in hammocks, dogs with red "Adopt Me" vests, and even a senior pig named Walter that had become something of a mascot. But the largest crowd gathered around a small wooden stage decorated with paper paw prints and string lights. A sign above read, "Celebrating a year of second chances." Edgar Hall adjusted the collar of his pale blue shirt, which fit a bit tighter than it had a year ago, but had been freshly ironed for the occasion. His gray hair was combed, his beard trimmed short. He stood just behind the podium, with a note card in one hand and a folded photograph in the other. Behind him, 5 golden retrievers sat inside a gated playpen, their tails thumping eagerly, their coats shimmering under the afternoon light. Each wore a colorful bandana and a name tag. They had grown, no longer the fragile, whimpering pups shivering in a cardboard box, but full-bodied, energetic young dogs with expressive eyes and distinct personalities. One was constantly pawing at the gate. Another sat perfectly still, head tilted, studying the crowd like an old soul. They didn't just look healthy, they looked loved. Noah stood at the side of the stage, partially behind the curtain, his hands clenched around the hem of his shirt. At 14, he had grown taller, his limbs stretched out like a tree in early bloom. His sandy blonde hair had been trimmed, and the faint scar near his temple had faded into something barely visible. He wore a clean gray hoodie and black sneakers that didn't squeak when he walked, but his eyes still carried a softness that kept him anchored, a reminder of where he'd been. Next to him was Marissa, arms folded, smiling gently without pushing him forward. She had worn denim for the first time in months and a volunteer badge on a blue lanyard. Edgar had asked her earlier if she'd speak too, but she shook her head. "This is yours," she'd said, then looked at Noah and added, "and his." Edgar stepped forward to the mic, clearing his throat. His voice was steady, but his free hand gripped the edge of the podium a little tighter than he intended. "A year ago," he began, "someone left a cardboard box at a bus stop in a snowstorm. Inside that box were 5 puppies, barely a month old, sick, cold, and alone. But tucked under the rags was something even more unexpected. A note written in blood. It said, 'Please help them. They did nothing wrong.'" He paused. The crowd leaned in. A few gasped softly. "That note didn't just save the dogs. It saved something in me too, because it reminded me that kindness doesn't always come with a name or a title. Sometimes it comes from the smallest hands in the darkest places." He looked toward the edge of the stage. "Noah?" Noah froze. Marissa nudged him lightly with her elbow, and after a deep breath, he stepped out. He didn't go to the microphone. He didn't need to. The moment he walked toward Edgar, the crowd saw what Edgar had seen months ago. Not a victim, not a lost boy, but someone who had made a choice to act when no one else would. The 5 dogs, as if on cue, perked up. Then one barked, a sharp, joyful yelp, and the others followed. The playpen gate had been left slightly unlatched for the moment. They bolted. The first to reach Noah jumped straight into his arms. The second slid into his legs. The third barked so loudly it startled a toddler nearby, but the fourth gently nudged the boy's hand with its nose and sat at his feet. The fifth stood back, tail wagging hard, head cocked, and then let out one long, low howl, as if to say, "We remember." Noah knelt to the grass, swallowed in fur and licks and tails. His head dropped, hiding his face. For a second, no one breathed. Then came the applause, soft at first, then louder, then thunderous. Edgar watched from behind the mic, the photo still tucked in his hand. the one of Noah a year ago, sitting by the crate with the puppies, his eyes wide and unsure. Now, he looked up with a different gaze, not cautious, but proud. He looked like someone who had come home. After the applause, a line of 5 families took the stage one by one. Each had been carefully chosen by the shelter and approved through home visits and interviews. One couple, Mike and Elaine, were retired school teachers who had recently lost their Labrador. Another, a single mother named Heather with twin boys, had been on the shelter's wait list for months. Each family approached Noah and thanked him directly. A few hugged him. One woman cried. Marissa watched all of it from the side, her arms crossed again, her smile never wavering. Logan arrived midway through the ceremony, dressed in his usual canvas jacket and jeans. He nodded toward Edgar, then toward Noah, saying nothing but watching everything. When the last puppy had trotted off on its leash beside its new family, Noah remained on the grass. The crowd slowly dispersed, drawn toward food stalls and game booths. Edgar walked over, crouched beside him. "You all right?" Noah nodded. "They're gonna be okay." "They already were," Edgar said, "because of you." That evening, long after the fair had ended and the shelter had locked up for the night, Edgar placed the blood-stained note, the original, into a frame. Beneath it, he placed a new photo, Noah with the 5 dogs one final time, moments before they were adopted, side by side, before and after, hurt and healed. The plaque below read, "Please help them. They did nothing wrong." The boy who reminded us what hope looks like. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage don't come from strength or status, but from kindness and the willingness to do what is right, even when no one is watching. Noah didn't have power. He didn't have safety. But he had compassion, and that was enough to save 5 lives and change his own. In our own lives, we pass by cardboard boxes every day. People in need, animals forgotten, moments where we could stop and say, "I see you. You matter." Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 31:8, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute." Noah lived those words, and through him we are reminded that every life, no matter how small, broken, or voiceless, is worthy of love. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Let someone else be reminded of the power of kindness. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. And leave a comment below with amen if you believe no innocent life should ever be forgotten. May God bless you, your home, and every quiet act of compassion you choose.